everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell, and it's time to do some transfer window reviewing. I'm here in my formal best. The transfer window has slammed shut in England, mostly, unless paperwork was filed before the deadline, but the deal wasn't fully complete. And it's still open in a few countries in Europe, like Netherlands and Switzerland. And it's wide open elsewhere in the world. But the transfer window has slammed shut, and now it's time to review the deals that happened, and maybe a few that didn't happen. Some of the ones we're discussing happened on deadline day. A couple happened since the last time we spoke about the January window. I'm going to be peppering in some trivia along the way, and we'll do my best to keep score as we go. Graham Ruthven, hello.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell, or Jim White, shall I say? I don't know whether that reference will resonate for American listeners. By the way, if you are a listener, you should be a watcher right now on our YouTube channel, because Taylor Rockwell has come in his glad rags for today's show.
That's right. Three-piece suit. It's time to be formal when the transfer window is to be discussed. When business is on the line, that's when I bring out the finest. Fun fact, Graham, did you know that of the 59 players signed by clubs in the Premier League in January, 51 were signed by Aston Villa?
I mean, that's not entirely shocking after yesterday, where it felt like they did a supermarket sweep of every player that was available in the final hours of the window.
As I said, I do have trivia to pepper in throughout. I have a real question for you, not including loan recalls. Did Villa sign 5 players exactly in this window, fewer than 5, or more than 5? What do you think, my friend? What do you think? Oh, we're all finger counting. I like it. Joe's maybe
5.
Giving away answers.
I'm not even in yet. Can I answer? I'm saying 5. 5 on the dot.
This question was specifically for Graham. Graham, would you like to agree or disagree with Joe?
I'll agree with 5. Let's go.
That
for
is
5
correct. There we go.
Yes.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
I
Wasn't
think
involved,
Graham
but
gets a
I
point.
wanted
We'll
to
see
be.
how it goes. Yeah, maybe you get a point. We'll go chaos scoring. Why not? Disasi, Rashford, Milan, Asensio, and Andres Garcia from Levante. Joe Lowry, we heard your voice there. Hello.
Hello. I want listeners to know, Graham's right, you really should be a viewer, at least in this moment. Again, I maintain YouTube video open on your laptop, podcast playing on your phone, maybe playing on another podcast platform on sort of your work phone, however you want to go about this. I want listeners to know that Taylor was insisting on having his camera off for like all of our pre-show meeting, and we were getting very confused and maybe even slightly concerned about what was going on. Taylor, this is amazing, and I am so happy right now.
Yeah, Graham, I believe, asked, "Are you recording naked?" To which I said, kind of the opposite, which I'm not sure made any sense to you all until the camera came on.
Sure.
Yeah, I tried to get everything ready and then duck out and come right back in, and now here we are. I guess you all didn't get the memo about formal wear for the January transfer.
I mean, this is my
recap
formal
show?
wear.
Okay.
This is what I wore to my wedding.
Of course it is.
And this is what I wore to Graham's wedding, so.
Beautiful. Joe, a little trivia for you to start the day.
Please.
6 clubs in the Premier League signed no players in January. A few of those 6 recalled players from loan, but 3 had no incoming business at all. Can you name one of those clubs? You can name all 3 if you want.
Mine's way harder than Graham's. Graham's is
No,
easy.
that's
We're
easy.
talking all
You've got
about Aston Villa on today's show.
6 shots at this.
Okay, let me think through the standings. So 3 teams, Taylor, did absolutely nothing in this window, including
Here's your
not
hint.
recalling any players.
Yeah, here's your hint, Joe. They all seem like they could have done business. They are not sort of under-the-radar teams, put it that way.
Sure. I don't. Did Liverpool do much of anything in this window?
They
I
did
mean,
not.
they didn't do anything major. So I'm going to go with Liverpool as one of my guesses. Graham's
You are
giving me
correct.
confirmation. Arsenal obviously didn't end up signing that number 9. I don't believe they did anything in this window. Certainly nothing notable. Arsenal, yay or nay?
Yeah, I'll give
think
Graham.
that's correct.
I'll give Graham a chance to get 1 point here, as I'm just doing.
Yeah, we got to give
scoring
Graham a
again.
point. Yeah, I can't just take up all the points.
Graham, can you get the final one?
Are we counting loan signings, right? They're counted in this.
Yes, loan signings,
Oh,
loan
man.
recalls also not involved. So Chelsea had loan recalls but no signings. Everton, Fulham also did loan
Yeah,
recalls.
Everton was the one. So they got Carlos Alcaraz on the final day of the window, so I was going to go for them. I'll say Bournemouth. Did Bournemouth do anything in this window?
They apparently did.
Oh,
There's-
no.
Again,
Okay.
a club that you would think maybe could have spent some money. Newcastle United, the other club
Oh,
to
yeah.
do
Oh,
there
zero
it is.
business
Yeah.
this January. All right, so we've got some trivia going. I believe Joe is out to an early lead with 2.5 points since he stole one from Graham. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the 2. Let's talk some transfers, and let's start with Aston Villa. They were more than a little busy on the final couple days of the window, largely fueled by their big money sale of John Duran to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. Joe, how much credit did the Chicago Fire get for this one?
I mean, not none, but also not a whole lot. I think the general sense was if the Fire did not sign John Duran from South America as a 17-year-old, I believe. I don't think he could yet officially move to Major League Soccer when he signed that contract. If that didn't happen, somebody else was going to. This was the Fire somehow, and credit to them beating some other teams to the punch. And he goes to Major League Soccer, doesn't end up playing a whole lot for the Fire, but does make them a whole bucket load of cash, which they're not really hurting for either because ownership will spend regardless. But either way, John Duran making himself a lot of money, making Aston Villa a lot of money, and making the Fire a lot of money.
Graham, how are you feeling about this transfer? Because on the one hand, it felt like Duran was poised for already having a breakout season, an even bigger breakout season. Could have been like the Villa striker of the future, maybe could have gotten another move. And now, as a youngster playing in Saudi Arabia, at the same time, it's also the case that if he had a downturn in form or gotten injured or what have you, maybe they bring in another striker. Maybe he kind of falls by the wayside. So in that way, he's getting that bag, he's making that money. I can't really hate on that as the decision. But it is a strange sort of move in my mind for him to be in Saudi.
Yeah, my reflex reaction, to be perfectly honest, is one of disappointment. The Saudi Pro League. I keep an eye on the Saudi Pro League. I put a clip in the newsletter every so often from the Saudi Pro League, but it is not a league that I would even know how to watch regularly. To be honest, I think it's on DAZN, but I don't really watch that channel very often. So disappointment. He's a fun player, and fun players are fun to watch. And we will not be watching as much of John Duran now that he's gone to Al Nassr. And I think I'm disappointed as well from a financial point of view, because I can understand why he would take that bag. And I think it's a different scenario when you are in that situation and a team comes along and offers you 300,000 euros a week or whatever it is he's going to get paid in Saudi Arabia. None of us have been in that situation, unfortunately.
Speak for yourself, Graham.
I don't know what Joe's getting paid, Taylor, but I have personally not been in that situation.
I should add, I do have several oil derricks behind my house. So that does sort of free up the purse a little bit on occasion.
Well, that's why you're dressed like that. Yeah.
Of course, yes, at all times.
But it felt like, to your point, Taylor, it felt like John Duran had a big money move in him to a Chelsea or a Arsenal. So I feel like he could have got his bag somewhere else if he had just stayed a little bit patient. Yeah. That move was in the pipeline for him. On the flip side, and I'm doing a lot of jumping around here, this is a striker who's scored 12 Premier League goals. And Al Nassr have just paid 77 million euros for him, plus 13 million or 12 million pounds in add-ons. So that deal could be worth 90 million euros for a striker who hasn't really got a long track record of scoring at the elite level. So I can certainly understand why Aston Villa have taken that money. I said last week that they would need to get closer to 100 million euros for Villa to consider that, and ultimately that's what Al Nassr did. But I am disappointed that we're not going to watch John Duran on a weekly basis from this point on.
Well, speaking of possibly questionable decisions, I should note it's like 76 degrees here in Richmond. I have turned the air off, but there is work being done outside, and I'm recording in a very confined space, so a three-piece suit was not the choice to make. I am going to be actively sweating by the time we finish this episode. Joe, here's your next trivia question. John Duran became the second most expensive transfer into the Saudi Pro League when he finalized his 77 million euro transfer. Who has the top spot?
Oh, no. There's like 87 different contenders to this. Is it, I'm just going to go with this, Taylor. Is it Neymar? Is it Neymar?
Yes. Your hint was going to be either we have talked about him recently or he no longer plays there. Yes, Neymar is your answer.
Money
Joe,
well spent, really. I mean,
a point. Yeah.
Obviously.
Totally.
Yeah, 7 games.
And speaking of money well spent, Villa had that Saudi money burning a hole in their proverbial pockets. They didn't let it go to waste. Graham, in the last 48 hours, they brought in, correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus Rashford, Axel Disasi, and Marco Asensio. Shall we start with Marcus Rashford, if I got those names correct?
Yeah, let's start with Rashford. I think that's the most interesting transfer of this entire window. Maybe in the Premier League as a whole, frankly. We spoke about Marcus Rashford. I think this is our third transfer window update of the January window, and we've spoken about Rashford in every single one. This was a saga that was bubbling away for quite some time. And when we spoke about Rashford last week on one of those episodes, we mentioned AC Milan and Borussia Dortmund and Barcelona. Aston Villa was not mentioned as one of those teams that was interested in Marcus Rashford. And frankly, at the time, it seemed very unlikely that Rashford would be staying in the Premier League. I know West Ham had been linked with him, but that didn't seem very feasible. All the reporting at the time was that Rashford wanted to get out of the country, wanted away from the gaze of the English media. But basically, it seems like those foreign options didn't materialise. The Barcelona offer never firmed up. Dortmund and Milan couldn't find the financial room to sign him. And Aston Villa, with that 77 million euros burning a hole in their pocket, or more accurately, the PSR room that afforded them, made their move. And the reporting by David Ornstein at The Athletic is this is a loan until the end of the season, with an option to make it a permanent move in the summer for £40 million. The crucial thing for Manchester United is Villa are paying a minimum of 3/4 of Rashford's wages, and that could even rise to 90% if he performs well. Keep in mind, he's one of the highest paid players in the Premier League. He's on, I think, £325,000 a week at Manchester United. That is, as a percentage, that is much more than I was expecting Manchester United would get for Marcus Rashford in this window. I thought it was going to be half at best, maybe even a quarter once they got desperate into the window. So to get that off their books is a real positive for Manchester United. On the Villa side of things, I think it's a bit of a gamble. I think there's a lot to say that he is a good fit for a Unai Emery team in the way that they play in quick transition. I'm excited to see how it works out. But there's a big old question mark over Marcus Rashford, not just as a football player, but as a personality right now, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to best describe this transfer, and I've gone with, you said gamble or a bit of a gamble. I would say fascinating, because I think it is interesting in so many different ways. There is obviously the drama with Manchester United, the falling out there when we kind of all expected him to retire a club legend. Now he's left. Is he fit? Is it a motivation morale issue? Is Unai Emery going to get an immediate response from him? Is he going to score 20 goals in the second half of the season, or is it going to end up being Villa eating a huge contract that maybe they shouldn't have gone with? I think it sets up a really interesting situation for Villa, who, again, did a ton of business. They've got some names to bet in. Joe, how are you feeling about this one?
I guess I don't know how much of a gamble this really is. I totally agree with Graham on being a little surprised at how much Aston Villa are covering of Marcus Rashford's wages. I think this is, first of all, a great deal for Manchester United. You don't love to be paying someone to play for someone else, which is still what they're doing in this case, even if it is just 25% or 10% or whatever that number's going to be at the end of the day. That's not a good business practice, I don't think. But getting to have Aston Villa put Marcus Rashford in the shop window for you, whether they're buying him or whether someone else does, or maybe this all, absolutely ends up on fire and it doesn't work out for anybody. Manchester United still avoided some costs here. For Villa, it is a gamble in that I don't know how much Marcus Rashford is going to impact this team, because he hasn't been himself and probably was never a truly elite player to begin with. And we also don't know exactly where and how many minutes Marcus Rashford's going to get in this Villa team. Jacob Ramsey has sort of made that left wing spot his, although he's not like a high-level attacking contributor in terms of goals and assists. Leon Bailey's over on that right side. He's at a similar situation, but Rashford has tended to be more of a left-sided or central attacker rather than a right-sider. So I don't know exactly where Emery's going to fit Rashford into this team. I think the most likely option, to be honest, is that he begins his time with Villa as a super sub, because he can play as the 9, he can play underneath the 9, he can play off the left, theoretically he can play off the right as well. I think there are options there, and he does add some value if he's ready to contribute across those 4 positions. But the reason why I don't think this is a huge gamble is it's not an obligation to buy, it's an option to buy. There's no pressure for Villa to trigger that. I understand that they're potentially lighting a bunch of money on fire here, and it maybe is not the decision I would have made from a sporting perspective or from an ownership perspective. But Villa, it's not like this is going to have long-reaching PSR implications for Aston Villa. It's going to cost them money, absolutely, but it's not like he's coming here on a 4-year deal or something along those lines.
Yeah. So I think then it becomes about how quickly is he able to play, how quickly is he integrated into that team, and where does he play? A lot of that will obviously be down to fitness, and there has been much made of Ruben Amorim's lack of enthusiasm with Marcus Rashford's enthusiasm in training and the energy kind of he puts out, as well as maybe the energy he puts out in games. Some of the unveiling photos have made him look a bit heavy. Maybe I think they've been like awkward angles maybe, and maybe he's added a bit of like muscle instead of just bulk. But it has led to an immediate question of like, is he fit at all, or has he just been hanging out? I'm inclined to think he is maybe fitter than some of those promo stills might indicate, which then I think will give us an idea of what his motivation is like. How motivated is he? Is he sort of tired of football? Does he need a break? Or is he getting into the Villa team, challenging for a spot, and then looking really, really sharp right away? And I think the answers to those two questions will end up telling us a lot, or maybe even more, about the situation at Manchester United. Because if you have a player like Rashford who seemed completely thrown by the wayside, completely disillusioned with things, and he goes to a new club and is yet another player who then immediately clicks into form, it tells us maybe things are even more rotten in Denmark / Old Trafford.
Yeah, Rashford needs this to go well more than Villa needs this deal to go well. Because Villa, to Joe's point, Villa are protected. If it doesn't go well, they send him back to Manchester United in the summer. They don't pay that £40 million fee. What does Rashford do if this doesn't work out? Because I presume Ruben Amorim, I mean, the way that things are going for Manchester United, maybe not, but I would still make the assumption that Amorim will be the Manchester United manager in the summer. And it seems like there's no way back for him at Manchester United as long as he's the manager. So I think there is absolutely pressure on Marcus Rashford to make this work.
Patrick Agyemang scores 25 goals in MLS this season. Rashford goes back to Manchester United. Swap deal for Charlotte and Manchester United. You send them opposite ways. I think it all works out. Who says no? Everyone? Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure that was
Patrick Agyemang says no to that at this point.
We've got a bit more Villa business to discuss, but Graham, I owe you a trivia question, so here is one for you. In his 9.5 seasons with Manchester United, Rashford won 4 different competitions. Some of them he won more than once. They are the FA Cup, the League Cup, the Europa League, and what other piece of silverware that will annoy you if you don't get it correct?
Community Shield?
You are correct. Well done,
Yes.
Graham. Nicely done. I thought I could slip that by you. Well done, Graham. Graham gets 2 points. It's now 3-2 in favor of Joe. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more trivia, more transfers. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We continue to talk about Aston Villa's business in the January window. Graham, you mentioned that we didn't sort of see the Villa signing coming. There was someone who did suggest Villa as a possible landing spot. I forget who it was. I know that they were kind of visionary and very intelligent and quite handsome. It was me. Me is the one who did it. Although I think mine was like, why don't Villa just throw out like a £20 million offer and see what happens? Because it did seem like maybe a lower tier Premier League club could do that, even if a lower tier Premier League club is playing in the Champions League and playing at a much higher level than Manchester United at present. Graham, let's talk about the other business that Villa did. Which one surprises you more, the Disasi move or the Asensio move?
The Disasi one, in that deal seemed to be dead on deadline day. He was apparently close to going to Tottenham Hotspur, then the deal fell through, and then he apparently Villa are paying a £5 million loan fee here for Disasi, which earlier in the day on deadline day was a stumbling block. Villa walked away from the deal, and then they're so desperate for defensive bodies right now with Diego Carlos going to Fenerbahce and a couple of injuries that they've got at the back as well. I think Tyrone Mings is not for the first time out injured at the moment. And so they just needed to get someone in the door, and so they returned to Chelsea. They paid that £5 million, and they got Axel Disasi into their squad. I'm not a massive Axel Disasi fan, to be honest. I think he is prone to lapses in concentration, and I don't think Chelsea are particularly distraught to see him leave, to go and join a Premier League rival, which kind of tells you a lot. But if you had told me, I don't even, like 2 years ago, that Marco Asensio would be signing for Aston Villa in the same window as Marcus Rashford, I would be questioning what on earth is going on, because there was a time when Marco Asensio I thought was going to be the next Real Madrid superstar, and I went to a Clasico once at the Bernabeu. He scored this incredible goal from 25 yards out into the top corner, and I remember at that time it was him and Isco who were seen as the next superstars for that team. Since then, his career has drifted, and the move to PSG I don't think has really worked out. And I do have questions. I think in the modern game, I have questions about what his position is right now, because in the modern game I don't think he's quite explosive enough to play for the best teams in the wide areas. You look at PSG with Barcola and Ousmane Dembele, and that seems to be very much what teams are looking for from wingers. And then in the middle, I don't think he's a good enough creator. He's not a good enough or a natural enough playmaker in that area. So I think this is a complete punt for Aston Villa. I don't think he is as good a tactical fit for Emery's system as Marcus Rashford is. Does he start over someone like Morgan Rogers at the moment? I would say no, the way that Morgan Rogers is playing. So let's see what happens. It's an interesting one, but I am not counting on a huge impact from Marco Asensio.
Graham, can you drill down into the tactical stuff a little bit more? Because sure. I think that's a fascinating point. And I agree, by the way, with your observation about Asensio. I do not think he's a pure winger whatsoever. He's very much not in that boots on the chalk kind of profile where he's going to drop his shoulder and move the ball past you and take you on 1v1. And I also agree he's not a natural number 10. I kind of think of him as being a pretty natural fit for that half space inside forward sort of role where he is a bit of a tweener in between the center and the pure wide areas, which I think there is some room, maybe not as an every game starter, but is some room in this Emery system. Why do you think that Rashford fits better than Asensio?
Because I think he has that verticality that I don't think Asensio has. So I look at, you're looking at surely Jacob Ramsey, right, as the position that both Rashford and Marco Asensio can fill. I think Rashford does a better Jacob Ramsey impression in that team than Marco Asensio, where Jacob Ramsey, I know he breaks through as this central midfielder, but he's this we spoke about him on the Weekend Review fairly recently. He will take on a man. He will give a team verticality. He gives Villa real dynamism. And so the question over Marcus Rashford is whether he is still that player, whether he can do those sort of things. But if Aston Villa get that version of Marcus Rashford, I still think tactically he's a better fit for this Aston Villa team. That's not to say that Asensio can't offer anything to this Villa team, but I think he gives them a different dimension. I would think of him being useful in a game where Aston Villa have more of the ball, where they're set up against a low defensive block. And to be honest, Marco Asensio is one of the best long range shooters that I've frankly ever seen. So that might be where his worth is to Aston Villa. But as a key player, as a central pillar of this team for the second half of the season, I'm struggling to see it.
All right, here's what I'm going to do. I have like 5 more questions about Aston Villa and what they did. We kind of have to move on because there are many other moves to be discussed. We do have a Patreon episode today. Maybe I can just save some of those questions and we can do a sort of transfer roundup at the end. We'll see how it goes. But in the meantime, Joe, let's move to the business done by Manchester City. They did quite a bit. But Nico Gonzalez to Man City now official. As past, present, and future dictator of Porto, how okay are you with Gonzalez departing Porto for £50 million?
You know, I feel like we got good value as a city, which is really what I felt like was important for morale locally, for the people. Absolutely. We only gave Barcelona 20% of that money instead of 40%. We're ecstatic about that. Barcelona.
Wait, they only 20%?
Yeah, so apparently the backstory on Nico Gonzalez, not the Juve one, first of all. That's not the player we're talking about here, which is what I thought initially when I was looking through, and I was thinking, this is a really odd move because I don't think Nico Gonzalez is that good, and City already reinforced the attack. Anyway, it's the Porto one. He's a midfielder. He came from Barcelona, and I'd also played at Valencia, but Barcelona moved him to Porto, and in that deal, Barcelona kept themselves a $30 million buyback clause and 40% of any future sell-on. Later, Porto and Barcelona came back to the table, and I believe it was $3 million that Porto paid Barcelona to knock that sell-on percentage for Barca in half, so from 40% to 20%, and also to ditch that $30 million buyback clause. And as we can see, that old move ultimately did not pan out for Barcelona. I think they ended up leaving about $5 million on the table because I think it would have been about $8 million that they missed out on from the 20% to the 40%, and then $3 million that they actually did get from Porto. Anyway, that's a lot of financial mumbo-jumbo, but Barcelona are probably happy to get any money at all out of this move. And if you're a Portuguese team that's about to cash a €60 million check or £50 million check, you're probably doing okay. I think this is a fascinating move. This is, for Man City, their midfield reinforcement. We've talked about it for the entire January transfer window. Who were they going to go out there and sign? They were looking at different players. Nico Gonzalez is the one they land on. And I think this is a really, really interesting deal. His profile is a 23-year-old. He started 17 games for Porto this season in the league. Started, I believe, all of their Europa League games. He's been heavily involved in the Europa League as well. Right-footed. And he is a central midfielder. He is somebody who is going to add quality to that central midfield group that has been hurting so much for Man City since Rodri went down injured. And that was always the question for City, is what happens if Rodri or maybe even Erling Haaland end up with an injury? And we've seen exactly what happens when you couple that injury with an aging squad. And Gonzalez is a younger player just entering his prime. He's somebody who has experience playing generally in the system that Man City want to play in his time with Barcelona. He's got that long kind of Sergio Busquets-like frame. He's not the quickest in terms of his ability to accelerate, but is able to cover some ground. And I think from the tape that I've watched, and I'd seen some of him as well in the past with Valencia and with Barcelona, I think he reads the game fairly well. I think he's a good metronomic presence towards the base of midfield. He can range higher as well. He's a flexible player that I think is probably best suited to be that deep-lying option for Man City. Whether he transitions into that role immediately, like we saw with Kusanov and Marmoush getting minutes at basically the first possible moment, or if it takes a little bit longer, Gonzalez is clearly a piece both for the present and for the future, because that's the kind of profile that he's at in terms of the age of his career, and that's the length of his contract right now with City.
Yeah, what I remember of Nico Gonzalez for Barcelona which was my first exposure to Nico Gonzalez. He played quite a lot for Barcelona. I think he's got like 30 appearances for Barcelona, so we're not talking about someone who just played a couple matches. But what I remember of him for Barca was he comes through La Masia, so I don't need to explain certain things about him because everyone who comes out of that academy is technically excellent, has good passing, is good in tight spaces, all the usual stuff. But what I remember of him is that he was very good at the simple stuff, but was maybe a little bit limited in his game. It seems like, and I can't pretend to have watched a whole bunch of him at Porto. I mean, I will have watched Porto in the Champions League or in some European games, but he wasn't a standout in those matches. But it seems, by all accounts, that he has added a lot to his game at Porto and is now much more comfortable at carrying the ball forward. And so there might even be a place for him in this City team once Rodri returns, maybe as someone a little bit further forward. I look at someone like Declan Rice. Could he perform a similar role to Declan Rice for Manchester City? And I think athleticism is a key point, because we've watched Man City a bunch this season. We spoke about them on the weekend review in the second half against Arsenal. They drop out of games at the moment with that midfield of particularly Bernardo Silva, who seems to be, the legs have gone from out underneath him this season. So in terms of his profile, he's exactly what City needs. It's just whether he is up to this might be a simplistic point, but it's just whether he's up to the level, because while it seems that he has progressed at Porto, I think he's going to need to make another big step forward to be a key player for this City team.
If I put you all on the spot and ask you to go with your gut here, because we often talk about how it can be difficult for new players to kind of bed in with Pep Guardiola, to play in a Pep team. If the Kusanov debut is on one side of the spectrum and maybe Marmoush is on the other, not saying he had the world's greatest debut, but it was solid enough, where do you think Gonzalez will be in that spectrum?
In terms of his debut, or in terms of his first half of the season?
Let's say next 6 months, basically.
Okay, so I think he'll be closer to Marmoush, but I wouldn't expect a huge impact, just because I think there are so many structural issues in that Man City team at the moment that you can't really expect to drop a single player into that midfield. Particularly one that I do have question marks about his level. As I say, I think he's going to have to up his standard quite significantly. I don't think he'll make a massive immediate impact. But he's one for the future. He's what did you say, Joe? 23 years old.
23. Yep.
So that's clearly the investment the Man City are making.
Yeah, I think he's very much not going to be on the Kusanov end of that spectrum. I pretty much agree with everything that Graham said. The question is, he's got the profile that I think fits this team. Just is he able to play with it's really a tempo problem, right? That's what we talk about when you move from one league to the next, when you go up a level. It's the speed of play happening faster all around you. And the question for Gonzalez is, can he thrive in that environment? We don't have the data to say 100% the answer is yes, but I think he's going to be a good signing.
When Nico Gonzalez heads the ball back to an opposition player on his debut, you all are going to be feeling very silly about this one. In the meantime, until that happens, Joe, guess what? I've got trivia for you. You ready for a city question? City signed 5 players this window. I will give you their names. Omar Marmoush, Vitor Rice from Palmeiras, Abdulkader Kusanov from Lens, 18-year-old Juma Ba from Real Valladolid. I forgot about him. Yep. And Nico Gonzalez. I will tell you, they spent, I believe, 8 million euros on Juma Ba. Does that bring, in total, those 5 players, does that bring City spending above or below 200 million euros for their January outlay?
That brings them above 200 million euros. Is that correct?
You are correct. Well above. 218 million euros by my calculations. Obviously, Marmoush, 70 million euros, the largest chunk of that, although Gonzalez, a fairly sizable chunk as well. Graham, we've talked about, let's see, Villa, City. Should we go to Spurs next?
Let's do it.
All right. Tell me about Spurs' business, both in the window, but maybe in the last 48 hours or so.
Yeah, so as we've already covered, I think Villa ultimately did the most late business in the window, but Spurs seemed to be the busiest, if I can make that distinction, which is to say they didn't get everyone that they wanted. So probably the biggest bombshell on deadline day itself was that Tottenham made a bid of around £70 million for Mark Getty, which was rejected by Crystal Palace. That would have been a huge signing. And frankly, I kind of wonder if that bid had been made earlier in the window. I sort of wonder if Palace might have accepted it, because I believe he's into the last 12 months of his contract. I think his contract's a little bit peculiar in that it ends mid-season, Mark Getty. And so I wonder if Palace might have accepted £70 million had that been made earlier in the window, had they had time to get a replacement. But anyway, that deal didn't get done. 2 deals that did get completed in the last couple of days. The first one was Kevin Danso, who joined from Lens for a fee of €25 million. I think he's a good fit for what Spurs needs, which is first and foremost a warm body in their defensive line, such as the injury crisis that they're going through at the moment. But he's played in a back three at Lens. He's got a good physical frame. He's decent on the ball. He was often the player. We watched a bunch of Lens in the Champions League this season. He was often the player who would start attacks from deep for that team. So I think he's a good fit for Ange Ball in that sense. And I was also reading that he has barely missed a match through injury over the last 2 seasons. So this will be a good litmus test. Is it just bad luck that Spurs have so many injuries, or is it something to do with the way that Big Ange wants his teams to play? Because Danso has barely missed a game, as I say. The other deal that got done late on, and this is arguably even more interesting, I think, was Mathys Tell. So he went on quite the journey over the last few days of the transfer window, where one day...
I believe he signed for 9 different clubs in the last maybe 72 hours.
Yeah, and you'll be shocked to learn that one of them was Chelsea. So Chelsea, apparently, he was going to Chelsea one day. He was going to be part of the Nkunku deal. Another day, he was going to Manchester United. In fact, I think the day before deadline day, that was the direction of travel, was he was going on loan to Manchester United. Manchester United balked at I think it was a £5 million loan fee that Bayern Munich wanted for him. And so Tottenham stepped in, and the deal that they have got done, they've completed in the end. It's a loan deal until the end of the season with an option to buy for €55 million. And I know a lot of Spurs fans who think maybe this guy isn't going to make an instant impact, but this is a 19-year-old kid who, when Bayern Munich signed him from Rennes a couple of years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, people in France genuinely thought he was the next big thing. He was the next Kylian Mbappe or something like that. And his development has sort of stalled at Bayern Munich, but Spurs are counting on that quality and that talent still being there. And so I think all the reporting that I read says that internally they're absolutely delighted that they got this deal over the line, and they have kind of every intention, assuming he doesn't get a bad injury or, I don't know, falls out with the Spurs fans or wears an Arsenal shirt at his unveiling, or when he's out to Nando's, or does something like that. I think Spurs have every intention of activating that permanent signing clause in his contract.
I am very curious to see how Spurs use Mathys Tell between now and then, and maybe even, to be more specific, how much they use Mathys Tell between now and then. Because, Graham, close to the top of the show, we talked about how Al Nassr, if they were any other club, how much they paid for John Duran would probably be described as something of a risk. It's not really a risk for them because they have unlimited money. But it's a fascinating move for someone, in Duran's case, who hasn't produced a lot at the highest levels. Mathys Tell has produced even less than John Duran at the highest levels. His goal contributions last year for for Bayern Munich really are heavily weighted towards him being a super sub, where the games are more open, the opposition teams are pushing forward against Bayern Munich because they're trailing goals, because that's what you do when you're playing against Bayern Munich, which gives chances for Bayern to go attack on the counter into extra space. Tell really thrived in that role last season. He's barely played this year. He's played 450 minutes for Bayern Munich so far this season. He has done very, very little. That's not a lot to go on, other than, yes, some time in France, and he's a very talented player. There's no doubt about that, and I'll talk about what I like about his game in just a second. But between those little minutes for Bayern Munich and however many minutes he plays for Tottenham this year, that's not a lot of information to make a €55 million decision. So I hope that Tottenham use this season. They're not going to get relegated. They're not going to push very high up the table. Use this as a real opportunity to get this player a lot of minutes, to learn more about where he can fit into this team and exactly how much he is worth to you. Because I think there is a possibility that he's not worth €55 million to Tottenham, and he's not going to be a player who is able to contribute at a truly elite level, because we just don't know. He's 19 years old. In terms of what I like about his game, he is positionally versatile. He could be a 9. He could be more of a half-space kind of inside forward guy. I do not think he is a wide forward, which there's a lot of talk about that being more of what Tottenham needed in this team. Tell is not that sort of drop a shoulder and take you on 1v1. He is strong, and he is, I think, technically proficient, especially with that right foot. He still has a lot of refining to do in terms of his decision-making, and that's something that I've picked up on watching him play for Bayern. And it's like, you can see how talented he is, and physically he is impressive. Yeah. And athletically he is impressive too. But I just do not think he is anywhere near that finished product right now, and nor do I think Spurs would expect that from a 19-year-old who hasn't played a lot at the highest levels. I'm just saying it is a risk, and if I was Tottenham, I would want to use this season that I'm basically not playing for. I mean, Big Ange wouldn't say this because he's probably coaching for his job, but where you're not really having anything on the line between now and the end of the year, like, let Mathys Tell play, and let him play a lot.
Spurs need him to pin down a position in this team, because while I accept, Joe, the versatility, you could see that as a positive, I also kind of wonder if it's in the same way it is for João Felix. a negative where you just don't, you can't place him in a team, and he's in and out of the first team, and he can play as a number 9, but he's not going to start over Dominic Solanke. Is he starting over Song Heung-min? Is he even starting over Brennan Johnson on the right wing, who actually has been pretty decent for Spurs this season? So I like his on a talent basis. I like what he brings. I like his potential. I don't really know what his position is at this point, and so that needs to be the work that Postecoglou does, I think, in the first 6 months until the summer.
Where I have concern is basically just with the way he's going to be discussed by the media and the amount of pressure that's going to be lumped upon him almost instantaneously. I kind of feel like it's going to be a similar situation to Kai Havertz, where there's potentially a very high price tag. There is a lot of hype, but there is also maybe not a clear understanding of exactly where he is best and exactly where he is best going to fit into this Spurs team. But there's going to be hype, and so if he's not starting right away, if he's not scoring goals and doing amazing things right away, I wonder how much lazy media analysis is going to be, this kid's a bust, this kid's not good. And so I think I would caution Spurs supporters and anyone talking about him to just remember it's a teenager making a jump to the Premier League to a club that are in a bit of an erratic situation at present. You kind of have to lower expectations while still being enthusiastic about the move. And also, you have to embrace that Joe knows how to say his name. Joe, thank you for teaching me that it's Mathys, like the painter, instead of Mathys or something else entirely.
Or whatever
You're welcome. You're welcome. And now, Taylor, that's one trivia question that was on the table to ask you today, was the pronunciation. I'll ask you another trivia question before I make one more point on this move. Are you ready, Taylor? Are you ready? Verbal confirmation?
I was always born not ready for trivia. Yeah, let's
awesome.
Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Mm-hmm. How much are you sweating right now?
A little bit.
Okay.
It's temperate. It's temperate in here. I'm drinking water when I'm not talking. You know, we're keeping it going. The people doing construction outside are still doing construction, so there is no breathe and no cool air coming through. I'm living the dream, gentlemen. Living the dream. But it's not nearly as bad as the BR Mines that Graham gets sent down still.
Right.
Don't complain to the construction workers that you're complaining about sweating. Oh, you're recording a podcast inside? Oh, Petal.
But really, what do you do for work?
Washing. Come on. They're power washing.
I'm a bit confused at how the construction workers have just shut down Breeze in the greater Richmond area, but I mean, I
can't open the window, is my feeling, because then it will just be, again, they are power washing the house next door, so it will just be a constant hum, which I know is what we get occasionally with other recording setups. But in this situation, if I can control it, I'll do my best.
We could just let Graham make a leaf blower sound in the background. That way you could still just open the window, figuring it can't get any worse. Anyway, to go back to this Mathys Tel move, I want to be clear. I love this move from Tottenham. I don't know that he's going to pan out. This feels like another fairly low risk. The concern is that you get him inside your building and you like him a lot, and maybe he's just not quite there, but you think you see the potential and you pay 55 million euros and it doesn't pan out. There is risk, and I think that risk is increased of making a poor financial decision by bringing someone with this potential price tag in the door. But you got to take swings, and I do really think he's a talented player. I agree with Graham. I don't know what his position is. There are real question marks around Mathys Tel. Man, the guy is dangerous in the final third. He's dangerous in transition. He's got that right foot. I think he's good 1v1, especially in tight spaces, more so than, again, attacking from a wide position. I think he's a fun player, and Spurs need quality. They need a lot of quality, and they need injury replacements, and I think Tel checks a lot of those boxes. On a 6-month loan with no obligation, this is like a no-brainer move. I really, really like this deal.
Graham, 2 things for you. The first, did you know that if you misspell Mathys Tel's name like I did and make it a double T instead of a TH, that if you put in Matty Tel, you will get a Google listing for a person named Matty in Richmond, Virginia, and their cell phone number. I learned that yesterday when putting his name into Google, so that's an important piece of information for you to know. Were you aware of that fact, Graham?
I mean, you'll get that search result. I won't, because I wear my tin hat and I cover my computer in it as well, so they can't track the two of us. So
I don't think covering a computer in tin is the best way to get it going. But Graham, I do think it's time for you to get a trivia question. You mentioned the hype around Mathys Tel. Prior to playing for Bayern Munich and Tottenham, I think he justified that hype because he broke through at Rennes in Ligue 1. He made his pro debut at 16 years and 110 days, making him the youngest player to appear in an official match for the club. That broke the previous record established by which current Real Madrid squad player / starter?
Nice.
Camavinga?
You are correct.
Nice, Graham. Well done.
A point for Graham as we go to the break. Joe is ahead 4-3. Might be hard for Graham to catch up once Joe started stealing extra points. Joe, crafty gameplay by you.
Pirate
Nicely
mode.
done.
Miles Lewis Skelly. Thanks for the inspo.
Yar. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the transfer window on the whole, moves we liked, moves we found most interesting. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. It is now time for a well-hosted, well-curated segment I am calling Stuff That You Guys Want to Talk About. Joe, moves from January either on deadline day or from the month as a whole that you found most interesting for whatever reason or would like to talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah, you got it. I love this. Thanks for opening the door. Especially, I love the name of the segment. I can tell that was carefully crafted.
What you got?
It's just good to be here.
Called.
I'm intrigued by AC Milan's deals. And we haven't really talked a lot about this. We mentioned the name of one of the players that has signed for AC Milan earlier in this episode, João Felix, who I am very, very interested in seeing how he progresses at Milan, because his career has been derailed. Like, he has not become the player that anybody thought he could be while watching him in the Skills Challenge in Orlando years and years ago now. He's never developed into that guy. He shares an agent with Conceição at Milan. That is Jorge Mendes himself. He ends up at Milan on loan with a $5 million loan fee heading over to Chelsea. I still think João Felix is a super talented player. I'm really, really intrigued about him. I don't have any expectations. I think, Graham, you used the term punt earlier on Marco Asensio going to Villa. This is a $5 million punt, which maybe is not exactly a punt. But I do think this is an interesting move, and I'm curious to see if Conceição is going to give Felix regular minutes for a Milan team that needs more quality. They need more talent in the attack. I think there's a lot to be gained, potentially, from all parties in this. Chelsea get him off their books for a little bit. João Felix gets a chance to actually show himself if, in fact, he gets into the lineup. And Milan get a really talented second forward, attacking midfield, half-space type, which I think they need. They don't really have somebody in that profile who has the types of skills that João Felix does. That's one move that is interesting to me. The other from Milan, with Alvaro Morata, with Alvaro Morata going to Turkey, Santiago Jimenez has signed from Feyenoord, the Mexican international, for AC Milan to be the number 9. Tammy Abraham has ended up with some of those minutes. You don't pay 32 million euros if you're Milan for a player if you don't want to give them a serious role. Santiago Jimenez is here to be that starting figure for Sergio Conceição. I think he's a good player. He scored consistently in Liga MX. He scores consistently in the Eredivisie. One thing that Garth Lagerwey talks about with Atlanta United, to think about a sporting director type, even though he's the president for Atlanta, in how they think in this space, generally speaking, if a player has had success scoring goals in multiple leagues, you feel a little bit better about transferring them to a third league, right? Yes, Liga MX and the Eredivisie are lower quality leagues than Serie A. There is risk here, but Jimenez has been that type of consistent goal scorer across multiple different environments, which shows that he can adapt to a new club. I think he's a solid fit for this 9 spot. I'm curious about the half sort of punt on Felix. I think Milan got stronger in this window without incurring like a massive amount of risk.
Question for you both, whoever wants to take this. So João Felix, was moved to Chelsea basically as a way to help finance the Conor Gallagher deal for Atletico Madrid, correct?
Yes.
Basically, Atleti didn't want him. They move him one way. Chelsea pay the fee. They can amortize that, and then they're fine with it, and then they can do the Gallagher sale as straight-up income. Now they can loan Felix out, get the loan fee of $5 million or whatever it is. My question for you both, do I have to apologize to Chelsea? Do Chelsea know what they're doing? Is this smart business as a way to get around PSR? Because it feels like to have a player that you weren't... I mean, it's terrible for the player, but as a way to get around PSR and make moves happen and still stay in like the financial green, they seem pretty good at this.
Yeah, go ahead, Graham.
Their team is in the top 4 in the Premier League right now, which is certainly better than I expected.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ate a slice of humble pie on Chelsea like a couple of months ago, and they faded a little bit since then. But maybe, I guess, is the answer to that. My point is just, and you got to it there, Taylor. This is not what the transfer market is meant to be. Like, João Felix at this point is a 0 on a balance sheet for elite level clubs. And it's just such a mismanagement of talent. Yeah. I don't know what he is at this point. So Joe, I'm not as warm on his signing as it seems you are. I think if we're talking about the abstract concept of João Felix, then
it's
maybe
great.
It is a good signing. But in reality, I don't know what he is in 2025. Yeah. So let's see.
Yeah. Same, 100%. I have no idea what he is. It feels like I think I got to this earlier, like a fairly low-risk move. This would come without a loan fee. It would have been a great move. I want to go back to your question, Taylor. I have no idea. I'm not even sure how to begin to answer that question because everything feels so complicated. The one thing that I just want to push back on slightly that you said was something about it being terrible for the player, assuming you're talking about João Felix here. Just as a reminder, because I feel like this comes up quite a bit in transfer windows, players outside of Major League Soccer, I suppose, always have a say in where they go, right? There's always three parts of a transfer. It is buying club, it is selling club, or loaning club, and loanee club? I don't know. Whatever. You get the idea. And the player. So the player always gets to decide what they want to do. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for João Felix. I think he's probably doing fine.
Yeah, I mean, they have a say, certainly. The question then becomes, like, how genuine are those conversations they're having when they're moving to Chelsea? When Chelsea are like, totally, we're going to play you all the time. Don't worry about it. Like,
no, we believe in you. Yeah. This has nothing to do with Connor. We promise. Like, it's not about him. It's not about him.
So I do think, maybe as long as they're being straight, I mean, like, look, here's the deal. Atleti don't want you. We're going to try to find a way to make it work. You've got to prove your spot, but we're going to pay you well along the way. I think you're right, Joe. Then, like, I have more or less sympathy for him, I guess, and more like, all right, he knew what he was getting into.
Totally,
My other question, which is going to make a ton of sense, now that they've both played for Milan, are we sure João Felix and Pato aren't the same people? Because I feel like they are very similar players, very similar styles, have made some interesting moves. I'm inclined to say that they're the same person.
Have both played soccer in Orlando, if we're going to continue to work on that theme. Yeah, Taylor, they might be the exact same player.
I believe Joe is due for a question. Joe, here's one for you while we're on the João Felix front. How many of the following players still play for Chelsea? João Felix, Carney Chukwuemeka, Christopher Nkunku, Ben Chilwell, Axel Disasi, and Trevoh Chalobah. That's 6 players. How many still play for Chelsea?
Read me the list one more time.
João Felix, Carney Chukwuemeka, Christopher Nkunku, Ben Chilwell, Axel Disasi, Trevoh Chalobah. Which I only learned yesterday, as, again, I'm going to tell myself. I always thought it was Trevor Chalobah. Did not read to the end to learn that it was Trevoh. So now I've learned that, and now I'm trying to gloss over that quickly.
There's a typo in his first name.
Yeah.
What's that video with Amadou Onana, and he's like, my name's not Andre, mate, or whatever it is. That's what's happening. I'm going to say 1. It might be 2.
So what was
Joe,
the list?
what's your wait, Joe? I'm going to need a number from you.
I'll say 2.
Joe is correct. It's 2. Joe gets the point. Well done.
They recalled
Joe.
Chalobah is still a Chelsea player, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
they recalled
Yep.
him.
And Nkunku is still there as well.
And Chukwuemeka joined Dortmund, I think, yesterday.
I believe
and
you're
Chilwell
correct.
joined Palace.
There we go. Graham, you know what? Graham gets a point. Just for knowing all those other things. Congratulations, Graham. You know what, Graham? You're
scoring here.
You're due one more trivia question. I'll give it to you now.
Whoa! Graham got a chance to tie for free and also gets a bonus question?
No,
That's how it works.
He's not tied. He's 1 point behind you. This would give him the tie. This would give him the tie. And there are more that maybe we'll do on the Patreon episode. Graham,
Good.
Which manager gave Evan Ferguson his Premier League debut?
Oh, would it be Graham Potter?
It would be Graham Potter.
Well done.
His present manager. That's right. Graham, any thoughts on Evan Ferguson going to West Ham, where we know strikers go to have resurgent and wonderful times?
Yeah, I ran through the list on an episode not that long ago of, I think it was the last 15 years of strikers for West Ham, and like of the 40 players or whatever it was, 2 had been moderate successes. Woo. So it is a place where strikers go to die. I hope that is not the case for Evan Ferguson, because I accept the risk with this one, and that risk is that Evan Ferguson has missed a lot of football over the last 18 months. He's had a lot of injury troubles. His development has certainly stalled. But it wasn't so long ago that people were talking about him as a £100 million striker, and Arsenal were apparently interested, and Manchester United and Manchester City, and basically every big team in the Premier League wanted a bit of Evan Ferguson. And I think it's a punt. It's a worthwhile punt from West Ham to gamble on those attributes still being there. And West Ham need a striker because at the moment Mikel Antonio is out after his car crash. Of course, he'll be out for some time. And then I think Nicholas Füllkrug is out for another couple months, which will take West Ham pretty close to the end of the season. So there is a clear need for a physical focal point of a centre forward like Evan Ferguson. I think what could have made this deal even better would be if there was a purchase option in this deal for West Ham. As it is a straight loan deal until the end of the season. I don't think Brighton are quite ready to give up on Evan Ferguson. I think from their point of view, what they want is him to go to West Ham, rediscover his fitness, score a few goals, go back in the summer and resume his development from 18 months ago. But nonetheless, I think this is a decent deal for West Ham, and I'm just excited to see him play again. He's been basically missing for the last 18 months, and when he was the most exciting young striker in the Premier League, he was fun to watch. So I'm looking forward to seeing him play.
An incredibly important update for this episode. The power washing is done. The window is open. It's slightly more breathable in here. Joe, coming to you now that I am relieved, to ask you for any other of your moves you liked.
Yeah, the last move that I'll get to, and I think maybe some folks were waiting for this, if they're regular listeners of this show, and I'm guessing you both might be able to guess what it is. It is Cucho Hernandez going from the Columbus Crew to Real Betis in La Liga. I think this is interesting on a lot of different levels. First, for Columbus, they get a 13 million euro fee plus potentially 3 more in add-ons. This is kind of brutal. I know that's a lot of money for a player coming out of Major League Soccer. That's not an insignificant amount of money for the January transfer window, regardless of what league you're coming from. But this is tough because they just lost their best player, and Wilfred Nance's job just got a lot harder. We could also be looking at maybe something of a slight exodus from Columbus. Apparently, Fenerbahce are linked to Steven Moreira, who's the reigning defender of the year. Christian Ramirez has interest from Colombia. There's a lot going on for Columbus right now. This is tough for them and very much changes my feelings on this team ahead of 2025, where they were a surefire top-tier team in Major League Soccer coming into the year. They are not that right now, even though I do think they'll be very, very good. Maybe they'll beat Cincy to the punch for Evander. Who knows? Who knows where they're going to go with that now open DP spot? This is a reminder of where MLS stands in the global landscape. The hope is for Columbus, and I guess really for Major League Soccer as well, the hope is that this is a good long-term play, where this absolutely does not benefit Columbus in the short term. There's no possible way to spin that. It's not like the Crew can chop up that 13 million plus and use it across the entire squad. That's not how MLS works. It's going to have to be used mostly to finance a new DP. This is a sacrifice from Columbus because they had bigger money offers from Central America, from Mexico, I suppose, and South America. They chose to take a bath a little bit on this sale because they wanted to help Cucho get to where he wanted to go, which is what it sounds like Colombia wanted for him. It seems like that's what he wanted. This is a sacrifice, both to sell him in the first place and to sacrifice some actual money that was on the table for them. This is, though I think the most interesting part of this from a big picture perspective is that this is a player in Cucho who was in a Big Five league before. He had played in the Premier League. He'd played in La Liga for multiple clubs. Moved to MLS as a young player. He was 22 when he moved to Columbus, and then moved back to a Big Five league in their prime. This is proof of concept that maybe should help in both Columbus and MLS as a whole generate more interest from high-level players who are looking to take maybe a slightly different path and also make more money than they would make at a European club along the way. I could only really find one other good example of a player doing this, where they come from a Big Five league, they come to Major League Soccer as a young player, and then they go back to a Big Five league. And that's Carlos Guerreiro, who came from Stuttgart in the Bundesliga to Dallas at 24, I believe. Maybe it was a little earlier. And then goes to Augsburg, I think, at age 24. This is a player who has followed a similar path, but is not an attacker. The only other attacker I could find is Adrian Hunu, who moved from Rennes, who's getting a lot of love on this show, to Minnesota United at 27, and then back to Ligue 1 to Angers at 29. It's not the same. Like, Cucho is kind of the first in his tier of players to go and do something like this. It feels like a useful pathway to open up if you're Major League Soccer, even if it hurts the Columbus Crew. So I think this is a really interesting deal. I think Cucho's going to play at Betis because they need goal scorers. He's flexible. He can play across a bunch of different spots. But this is an interesting macro move, maybe more than anything else for me.
Graham, any thoughts on Cucho or any thoughts on any other moves that you wanted to mention?
From the Betis point of view, I think it's an interesting one because there is a spot up for grabs in that Betis team at centre forward. They've kind of been searching for a long-term solution at centre forward for a number of seasons now, and at the moment they are. I watched them, as we spoke about in the weekend review. I watched them play Athletic Club. Anthony was very good in that game. It was Cedric Bakambu who started as the centre forward in that match, and there were moments from him, but it's kind of the same old story with Cedric Bakambu. Obviously was at Villarreal previously before, just nothing really sustained. The other player that they've got in that position is Vitor Roque, who I can't quite recall if he's on loan or if it's a permanent deal from Barcelona, but anyway, he was at Barcelona, didn't really get a chance there. Still very raw, has a good physical frame, but technically is maybe lacking a little bit, which is unusual for a former Barcelona player. I think Cucho, I prefer Cucho over those two players straight off the jump, like going into that team for the second half of the season. So from the Betis point of view, I think it's a potentially excellent signing, particularly for that money. One signing we haven't spoken about this month that I would like to spotlight is Michael Kayode to Brentford. So for anyone who doesn't know who he is, he's a right back, had been with Fiorentina for a number of seasons, still very young, and whenever I watch Fiorentina, he always stood out. And Brentford have signed him on loan until the summer, and then they've got a €16 million option to buy in the summer, which is a sort of try before you buy. And I think Brentford, they've needed a long-term solution at right back since, and I mean, I hate this deal for this point, but since Aaron Hickey decided to stop playing football and just be injured for the last 2 seasons. Roslev, I think, left Brentford in this window as well. So they needed to bring in a right back. And I think while he's still a little bit raw in a technical sense, I think he'll be a great fit for Brentford with how they play at speed going forward. He'll give them that outlet down the right side. And so, yeah, I really like that business from Brentford. It would not surprise me if in like 3 seasons we're talking about Kayode as a top-level right back and the biggest clubs in the Premier League are interested.
Graham, looking at the top 5 transfers by fee this January window. So number 5, Nico Gonzalez. Omar Marmoush, number 4. So City spending some money, trying to kind of stabilize things, makes sense. John Duran, number 3, going to Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Makes some sense. Kavicha, the number 1, going to PSG. Again, I think that fee is justified. He's an incredibly exciting player. He's still only 23.
I know where you're going with this.
He's going to make PSG excellent. Do you know who number 2 is? Joe, can you guess who number 2 is?
Number 2 on this list? This should be so obvious.
I think I do.
Go ahead, Graham.
I'll give you a hint. It should not be obvious because it's confusing.
Is it the guy from Portugal who moved to shoot? Nah,
nope, it's Xavi Simons, isn't it?
Xavi Simons.
Yes,
it is.
Of course. Yeah.
Yes.
Which is very confusing that Leipzig have... So they've paid €50 million plus €30 million in add-ons to sign Xavi Simons on a 2-year contract, which is confusing because if the plan is to sell him on, as Leipzig do as a club, that's their entire business model, are they really going to get... Well, first of all, are they going to get over 80 million, even if he had a long-term contract? Would they get over 80 million for Xavi Simons? And then keep in mind that in 12 months' time, as happens in the transfer market, his value is going to dip quite significantly. What are they going to do at that point when he's got a year left in his contract and they've just paid 50 to 80 million euros for him? It's a really confusing signing. I saw Manuel Vaith trying to explain it and try to explain some of the logic behind it. I've got to admit, I still didn't really understand much of the logic behind it. Basically, it seemed to be that Leipzig are under pressure to prove that they can compete at the top of the Bundesliga, and so they've just signed Xavi Simons permanently because he's been such a key player for them. He's so exciting in terms of his future and his potential. But for that money, I don't know if I'm on board with that.
Graham, I love Manu. There is no but coming. However, I will ask you, how much of that explanation from Manuel was rooted in, well, they're a Bundesliga club and Bundesliga clubs do smart things, so it's a smart move?
There's maybe a bit of that.
A little bit,
he's an advocate for the Bundesliga, and we love him for it.
Yeah. Not always Leipzig. I think sometimes maybe he has some questions about their business model and how they operate. But that will be an interesting one. Though, Joe, Transfer Market does value Xavi Simons at 80 million euros, and we know that is dead on the accurate valuation. Yeah. So in that way, Leipzig got a bargain.
Yeah, 100%. No, I mean, I think you're spot on there. I take transfer market values as the guiding principles of my life. I assume we all did that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
And then we all agree that Patrick Dorgu, the left back going to Manchester United, the best bit of business.
Move of the window.
What they needed, and it's all perfect now.
Solved.
Yeah, I love how Manchester United came into the January window with one of the weakest attacks in the Premier League and then sold or loaned out 2 attackers and didn't bring any others in. Yeah, that'll fix things.
Yeah. Kind of feeling like maybe they're kicking the can down the road till the summer. Like maybe they're kind of writing off this season and like just kind of prioritizing the Europa League, and that's about it. Let's hope Amad Diallo and Bruno Fernandes don't get injured, because if they do, Rutrow, not great. Not great for Manchester United. But you know what? We don't need to talk about them. We don't need to talk about any more transfers because we've already talked about plenty. We will be doing some more transfer talk, some Villa talk, maybe a little bit more trivia over on the Patreon. But for now, Joe Lowry, Joe Scally, as he is described in the video. How many Joes do you have ready to go? Do you have more Joes or more Jows?
I've got more Joaos because there are more. For listeners who cannot see that I put my name as Joe Scally on a recording, the recording software we use allows you to type your name in before you start, and I'm cycling through all of the Joe or Joe-adjacent soccer names I can think of. We've done Jose Mourinho. I think we did Josep Guardiola already. We've done Joao Felix. It's a long list, Taylor. I'm working through it. Joe Hart was yesterday, I think. Today was Joe Scally.
They're always wonderful, and they always take me way too long to notice. And then when I do, they make me laugh, as it did today. So thank you for that, Joe. Graham Potter, thank you for your time and effort today. I very much appreciate it, Mr. Ruthven.
Thank you, Taylor Rockwell. Yeah, it's always very confusing when I'm editing the video version of the show and the track shows Joe Hart. It confused me a lot yesterday. I was like, Joe Hart? Did we talk about Joe Hart? Was he on the show? Did I miss that? So, but I enjoy it. And thank you to you, Taylor, for turning up in your best Jim White attire.
Mm-hmm. Who is Jim White?
I didn't get the reference anymore the second time than the first time.
So Jim White is Mr. Deadline Day in the UK on Sky Sports News. He is very much credited with sort of popularising it as a concept in the UK. I think that concept has died a little bit. I watched some of Sky Sports News yesterday. It wasn't great. But yes, he's a big figure in the UK. Taylor is currently Googling.
I'll take it. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite.
You don't look anything like him.
Graham Ruthven, thank you, my friend. Listeners, thank you all, my friends, for listening, for sticking with us. We'll talk to you tomorrow when we do some USMNT Weekly. We're going to talk about some transfers into Major League Soccer. We're going to be doing lots of different things, Joe, including maybe some listener questions. It's going to be a scattershot episode, but I'm very excited for it. Until then, we'll talk to you soon.